Welcome back, everybody. We're doing something a little different this time.
Oh,
Yeah, we're diving deep into a single source, a Gujarati sermon that really got me thinking.
sounds interesting.
It is. It all starts with that passage in Luke. Uh,
Right.
yeah, 18.313D4,
Okay. Yeah.
where Jesus predicts his death and resurrection. And it's like the third time he's done this.
Huh. The third time.
Right. So you'd think the disciples would kind of get it by now, right?
Yeah, you'd think they'd be used to it by then.
Exactly. But that's the jumping off point for this sermon, you know. Even Jesus' closest followers, those who basically lived and breathed his teachings, even they didn't fully understand.
Hmm.
And that got me thinking about, how we approach faith and understanding, especially when we're talking about interpreting these ancient texts.
Oh, that's a great point.
Right. Because it's not always easy, is it?
It's definitely tricky terrain.
Totally. And this sermon really digs into this whole question of religious authority and what it means to have faith.
Right.
Yeah, and what the dangers are of just blindly following.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, there's this one point about Old Testament prophets and high priests that really struck me.
Ah, yeah, I remember that.
The sermon points out that none of the prophets, those who were directly communicating with God, right, none of them were also high priests.
Yeah, even though both roles are all about that deep spiritual connection, right?
Exactly. And I'd never really thought about that before, but it made me wonder, why is that? What's the significance of separating those roles like that?
Right. It can't just be a historical coincidence, right?
I mean, what's the deeper meaning there?
Exactly. And the sermon argues that it's all about the balance between having that structured religious guidance from the high priest, but also the individual's own personal pursuit of understanding, you know?
Ooh.
Like we need both.
Oh, so it's not an either-or situation.
Right. Not at all. It's
Wow.
like we need the high priest's authority and the prophet's direct connection.
I see.
It's both hand.
So are they saying we shouldn't rely on religious leaders at all?
Well, hold on. Not quite. It's not that extreme.
Right.
It's more nuanced than that. And they use this really powerful analogy to make that point. It's the story of Bartimaeus, the blind man.
Oh, yeah, from Mark, right.
Right, Mark 10.
Yeah, Bartimaeus, he was physically blind, but he was the one who recognized Jesus as the Messiah.
And his faith led to him being healed.
Exactly. And the sermon makes this really interesting contrast between Bartimaeus and the disciples.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Right. Like the disciples, they were physically with Jesus. They could see him, talk to him.
But they still didn't fully get it.
Right. So it's like this powerful reminder that true understanding doesn't always come from being close to authority, but from that genuine personal seeking.
It's like you said earlier, that tricky terrain of faith and understanding.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
it really makes you think about how we view those closest to Jesus, right? Like we think of the disciples as having this inside track, but even they missed the mark.
And this sermon is saying that's more common than we think, you know?
Really?
Yeah, even today we're wrestling with these ancient texts, trying to understand teachings that were given centuries ago in such a different context.
That's true. I mean, what was it about the disciples' mindset that held them back?
Right.
Were they just so stuck in their own ideas of what the Messiah should be?
That's a really good question. Some scholars think they were expecting a conquering Messiah like the prophecies talked about.
Ah, I see.
So to them, the idea of a Messiah who suffers and dies, it just didn't compute.
It totally went against everything they thought they knew.
Exactly.
So wait, are we saying our own baggage, our
Yeah.
preconceived ideas can get in the way of our understanding too?
I think that's exactly what this sermon is getting at. It's like a call to action to check our own biases, you know?
To really look at those assumptions.
Yeah, and approach these texts with humility and a willingness to be challenged.
It's like that Einstein quote, the mind that opens to a new idea never returns to its original size.
I love that.
Right. Maybe it's the same with faith. If we open our hearts to new understanding, it expands our connection with the divine.
Beautifully put. And this sermon is reminding us that questioning things, it's not a weakness.
It's not.
No, it's actually a sign of a strong faith. It's about engaging with the material, really
Yeah.
wrestling with those tough concepts and coming to a deeper, more personal understanding.
That really resonates with me. It's so easy to just passively accept whatever we hear from religious leaders or, just go with the flow of what everyone else thinks.
Right.
But this sermon is saying be an active seeker. Engage critically with what you're being told.
And it goes back to that distinction we were talking about. Yeah.
Between the prophets and priests.
Yeah. We need both. We need the structure and guidance from our religious leaders, but we also need that personal struggle, that direct connection like the prophets had.
But then doesn't that make you wonder if those closest to Jesus still didn't get it? How can we, centuries later, hope to understand?
That's where the sermon offers us hope. It points to Bartimaeus as an example.
Bartimaeus, the blind man.
Yeah, he wasn't part of the inner circle, but he achieved that profound connection with Jesus through his own seeking and his faith.
He didn't have access to all the theological debates or years of study, or
Exactly. But he had something more powerful, a genuine desire for truth, a willingness to see beyond the physical and recognize the divine.
wow, yeah. So it's not just about understanding every little detail in the text. It's
Yeah.
more about that yearning for connection.
It's like Bartimaeus, just this pure desire to connect with something bigger than himself.
Yeah, and the sermon talks about how that seeking isn't limited to reading or listening to sermons.
It's about actively living your faith,
Through prayer and meditation,
acts of service.
even just being present in the world and seeing that divine spark everywhere.
It's all connected.
You know, it makes me think about how we often separate our faith from our daily lives. Like it's this thing we do on Sundays or whatever. But what if we tried to see the divine in the ordinary, like Bartimaeus did?
That's a beautiful thought, finding the sacred in the everyday.
Right. And maybe that's the biggest takeaway from this whole sermon.
What do you mean?
It's not about blindly accepting someone else's interpretation. It's about going on your own journey.
Your own path to understanding.
Exactly. And being open to being surprised, challenged.
To find that connection that really speaks to you.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge with all the noise and opinions out there.
It is.
But it's also empowering to realize that we have the power to shape our own understanding of faith.
To define what that connection means for us.
It's about reclaiming that sense of wonder and awe that can get lost sometimes,
It can.
and finding that joy in the seeking.
The thrill of discovering your own path.
So as we wrap up, I keep coming back to this question. How do we cultivate that Bartimaeus-like spirit in our own lives?
How do we stay open and challenge ourselves and really deepen our connection with the divine?
It's a big question.
It is, but maybe the first step is just admitting that we don't have all the answers.
To approach faith with humility.
Curiosity, a willingness to ask questions.
To explore different viewpoints. And to trust that we'll find our way.
To trust the process.
It's a journey, not a destination.
That's a good way to put it.
And every journey has twists and turns.
Moments of clarity, moments of confusion.
But the important thing is to keep moving forward. Keep seeking.
And trust that the path will unfold.
One step at a time.
You know, thinking about the disciples' struggles, it's comforting to remember that even they didn't have it all figured out.
Yeah, we're all in this together.
Stumbling and seeking, learning and growing.
On this amazing journey.
And who knows, maybe we'll have our own aha moments along the way, just like Bartimaeus.
That's a great thought. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone.